do want to say I'm very honored to be here. I love your church. I wish I lived a little bit closer. Let's see, this would work better if I turn the power. Great. But I'm really glad to be here. I really like your pastor. Maybe if Roy and I hang out, we balance out the hair karma of you. Although he's moving in my direction faster than I do think he does have the potential for a great comb-over if he wants to go there with Roy. I'm also really happy that my wife, Grace, who you just wave, Grace, she hates it. For us is our very dear friends, Claude and Kelly, are here, who are friends who I've spent a lot of time, Grace and I have spent a lot of time with them in Africa. Claude is from Burundi in East Africa, and our kids are visiting us this weekend, so I'm really glad they could be here. And I actually wanted to start by telling a quick story. From a time when I was in Africa with Claude. We were in the country of Rwanda. Maybe you remember all the terrible stories from the 90s about the genocide there. And a group of us were going from Rwanda to the country next door, which is called Burundi. These are two little countries right in the center of Africa, just east of Congo. Both countries are about the size of the state of Maryland, with a little more population. And we were traveling to Claude's home country, which is Burundi, and we were come across in a bus with, I don't know, 18 or 20 people, and we came to the border, and the way they worked border control is that everybody had to get out of the bus, we had to walk across a bridge over a river, hand in our passports, and then they look at the passport and let us go through. Meanwhile, I guess they were checking the bus for contraband, because you never can tell what, especially ministers are going to be bringing in. And then the bus would come across and we'd get back on the bus. But there was a delay in the time between when we walked across and the bus was allowed to cross. And in that few moments, we were besieged, we were just surrounded with very, very desperately poor people who saw some people who looked like they might have some money. And they were desperate for money. And sometimes you meet people and you think they're asking for money because they want to go out and, buy a fifth of whiskey or something. But this was not the case. And I'll never forget a woman, I'm going to guess she was in her mid-20s, although she looked like she was a lot older because she'd seen some hard life. And she was a member of the tribe called the Batwa. They're the smallest minority group in that part of Africa. They're the indigenous people. They were there before other tribes moved in. And as indigenous people are in many parts of the world, they're very badly treated, their lands have been stolen, and they're seen as less than human by some of their neighbors. And this Batwa woman, as often is the case, had her baby on her back in a cloth, kind of like we would have a backpack or something, but it was just a cloth wrapped around her baby's on her back. And she came up to us, bending down low as a sign of real desperation, holding out empty hands. And of course, we weren't prepared and we didn't have currency in the right, we didn't have their local currency, and we're sort of looking at each other. And when she saw that it looked like we weren't going to give her anything. Now this might sound a little shocking, but I've just got to tell you this is what really happened. She pulled down her shirt and her breast it just looked like a flap of skin. And she pointed to her breast and then pointed to her baby and then said, nothing. I have nothing to give my baby. She was so hungry she couldn't produce milk. And she held her hands up. And, we pulled together what we could and tried to help her. But at that moment, can I tell you something? At that moment, God spoke to us all through her. And God helped us see a reality that a lot of us don't see from day to day. And one dimension of that reality is that if you go around the world, very often the people who are suffering the worst are women. There are a lot of reasons for this. One of the reasons is that men find it very easy to impregnate women and then leave. And the woman is left with the children. Often it's because when there's a war, the men go kill each other, leaving the women as widows with children. Very often it's because men spread diseases that the women get, or that the men die and leave the women alone with children. But around the world, it's been true for thousands of years, and it's still true today, that very often the most desperately needy people in the world are women. Sometimes it's because men are violent and abuse women. But if you see a place of suffering in the world, very often the place where the pain is felt the greatest is in the hearts of women. And I think a lot of the women in this room understand that. I remember someone saying, when you have a child, for a woman, it's now your heart is outside your body. And because of a mother's love for her children, so much of the pain of the world is borne by women. That's why in recent years, when leaders of the world got together and established the Millennium Development Goals, of the 8 goals, 5 of them very specifically relate to women. If you're going to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, you're going to begin with women like the woman I met on that bridge that day. And if you're going to achieve universal primary education, you're dealing with young children, and especially young girls. One of the things we've learned is that if you want to uplift the well-being of a society, help mothers and help girls. Because when they grow up, they make a big difference. Promote gender equality, empower women, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health. You can see, you want to make the world a better place, then you start with girls and you start with women. Around the world, mothers and little girls are the most vulnerable people. And it's very interesting to me that when I worked on the book that many of you are reading and that you're going through this year, I'll just tell you, I noticed as never before the importance of women in the biblical story. Women and little girls, they show up at pivotal points. And I know that's a surprise to a lot of people who think, you know, it's a man's world. And a lot of us have been taught the Bible in such a way that the Bible seems like a man's book. Because so often the people we talk about, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, Elijah, Elisha, it's all men. But that's just the way we tell the story. If you go back and read it again, women keep popping up in really important places, and they have an extremely significant role in the biblical story. And is that ever true in the Christmas story? You realize that this world where men find all kinds of ways to cause trouble, it's very often the women who are picking up the pieces and bringing some healing. You find it in the beginning of the Bible, in the amazing story of Abraham and Sarah. And Sarah was an old woman who had never been able to have children, all through her childbearing years. And in the ancient world, that was a cause of great shame for the woman and for the man. She couldn't have children. And late in life, God surprises her, and she gets pregnant when she wasn't supposed to. And the beginning of the Jewish people's identity comes from Abraham and Sarah. When it seemed like it was too late, God showed them it's not too late. And then we come to the Christmas story, and the miracle of Sarah and Abraham is repeated again with Elizabeth and her husband Zechariah. And we hear that story in the Christmas story about a surprising birth when it seemed too late. And probably in a lot of our lives, there are things we've hoped for, we wished for, we've prayed for, and it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen. And people say, just hang in there a little bit longer and it'll work out. And you hang in there a little bit longer and it doesn't work out. And you get to the point where it's too late and beyond, and you've given up hope. Can you see why telling a story like the story of Sarah and the story of Elizabeth is important to people who their hope has run out, but maybe they can hope against hope? That after the last minute, a miracle might still happen. So that story is the first one we get in the Gospel of Luke. And then we come to the story of Mary. Mary's kind of at the opposite end. Instead of being too old to have children, everybody thinks she's not ready to have children. And of course, that brings up the story of the virgin birth. Now, I would imagine that some of you in this room find it no trouble in believing of a miraculous virgin birth, and others of you think, come on, is that very realistic? And can I just say, whether you want to take this literally or metaphorically, I respect your right as an interpreter of Scripture. But what's interesting is, we know that in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the book of Isaiah, the original text didn't say a virgin will conceive, it said a young woman will conceive. Then when the Hebrew text was translated into Greek, the Greek text said a virgin will conceive. And so you had these two different interpretations or two different expectations. And so this raises the whole question of virgin birth. Now, for a whole lot of people, when people hear the story of the virgin birth, they think, you know what this is really about is God doesn't like sex. And so God has to find some way to do things without all the messiness. But look, if you know anything about the Bible is not shy about talking about sex. I remember when I was a little boy and I was in a church service like this, and they kept reading these verses about something called circumcision. And I had no idea what that was, so I went home and I asked my mother what it was, and she said, ask your father. And I asked my father, and when he explained it to me, I was so embarrassed. I thought they shouldn't talk about this sort of thing in church. I was mortified. But you know, the Bible's not embarrassed about sex. And in fact, you find out in the Bible that it's God's creation, right? It's Christians who've been uptight about sex, not God, and not the Bible. The fact is, the whole story of the virgin birth in Isaiah, it wasn't about virgin birth, it was a young woman. The important thing wasn't the woman, the important thing was that she was going to have a son, which is not all that usual, but here's what was unusual. What would you name the son? That was the shocker in the book of Isaiah, that she would have a son whose name was Emmanuel. El means God, God with us, that's what the word means. God among us, God with us. And then, of course, you skip ahead a few chapters in Isaiah, and you realize that what this is really about is not sex. It's telling us that what seems impossible, what seems too late is still possible. It's telling us that all the pharaohs and all the Caesars of the ancient world had their miraculous birth story that legitimized that there was something really special. Here's another really special person being born. It tells us that sex isn't really the problem. The real problem is violence. Here's the deal. In the ancient world, it's men who organize wars and fight wars. It's men who run systems of controlling, oppressive patriarchy. Here's how I explain it in the book. In Luke's telling of the birth of Jesus, God aligns with the creative, feminine power of womanhood rather than the violent, masculine power of statehood. The violent power of top-down patriarchy is subverted not by counter-violence, but by the creative power of pregnancy. It is through what proud men have considered the weaker sex that God's true power enters and changes the world. And so God with us, showing up through a young woman conceiving, Emmanuel, this child who's born to us is known not as the greatest warrior who ever lived, who killed more people than anybody else. You see, that's how Caesars and pharaohs gained their notoriety. It's the death toll that you can inflict that shows your power. No, this one is called the Prince of Peace. This one brings in a realm of endless peace, reigns by justice and righteousness. And so that's the backstory against which an angel comes to Mary and uses all this language. And no wonder Mary is like really confused. First, I'm a poor woman. I'm a nobody. When you want to take the social pyramid, I'm a poor single woman. And in the ancient world, that puts you down at the bottom. And so when she hears this kind of language, she says, this doesn't compute for me. Look, I'm not even with a man yet. And he just says, it's no problem. The Holy Spirit will come upon you. God's power will overshadow you. God is going to do something new in you. Get this. No man is required. We're going to now, you might say, well, hold it. Jesus, why wasn't Jesus born a girl then, if we're trying to make a point? But look, if men are the problem, if violent, hateful, greedy, lustful, aggressive, vicious, arrogant men are the problem, then the solution has to be a nonviolent, gentle, forgiving, kind, loving, neighborly, unarmed man. So God is entering human history to show us a new way of life, a new way of living. And Mary responds. She says, okay, if this is going to happen, I can't do it alone. Let it be to me according to your word. And then Mary she utters a poetic, beautiful song, or a statement we call the Magnificat. And isn't it interesting? What amazes her is a humble, lowly, poor, young girl like me. God is choosing to start with me. Not a princess in a castle, not a king on a throne, but just me. And then she realizes this is the beginning. Because God's choosing me, a woman, God is going to upset the order of things. And the people on top are going to find out what it's like to be hungry. And the people who've always been hungry are going to find out what it's like to be full. And it's an amazing song. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but I needed an image. The powerful men who call the shots and rule the world and decide who's in and who's out, who's fired and who's hired. Right? We know the story of the powerful men who run things and where it goes. And I just want us to realize the Christmas story is a radical story that says when God wants to do a new thing, says, I got to find a woman who is ready through the power of the life-giving power of pregnancy, the life-giving power of nurture, to show, can I say it this way, that plowshares are more powerful than swords, and that pruning hooks are more powerful than spears, that nurture is more powerful than hate. You know, whenever a war happens, brave men go out and fight on both sides. And mothers weep when their sons are killed. Remember when Jesus said, blessed are they who mourn? He didn't just say, blessed are those who cry, or blessed are those who are sad. The word mourn means what happens when you lose someone, and what's one of the most common ways you lose someone? Through war. I think part of what Jesus is saying there in blessed are they who mourn is those mothers and fathers on both sides who see the tragedy of the way human beings are living. I'm here for them. Good news is here for them. There's a different way to live. We can imagine a different future. And that's why I think at the center of the Christian faith, at the center of the good news, at the center of the Christmas story is an audacious replacement of the power of men with the power of pregnancy, the power of giving life, the power of nursing and aliveness that's resident in a woman. And it's interesting today how artists are trying to depict that message, that vision with new, powerful visual imagery that keeps us hearing the radical nature of that message. That Mary was not just being the mother of Jesus, but through Jesus was becoming the mother of a new humanity. Can you think of it this way? A new Eve. And to say, I want to be part of her family, is to say, the way that we tried to do humanity 1.0 hasn't gone so well. I'm signing up for humanity 2.0. So Mary gets this all going, because she is willing to say, I might have had plans. I did. I was engaged. I might have had dreams for my life. And now it's been interrupted with other possibilities. Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. And I don't know if Paul was reacting to that story, but it sure resonates when he wrote in the book of Romans. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies. You see, Mary wasn't the only one who was being asked to surrender her body. All of us, men and women, old and young, the people who feel like it's not my time yet, and the people who feel like my ship sailed. All of us together. It's not too early. It's not too late. All of us together, rich, poor, together, messed up, whoever we are. The invitation of Christmas is that we say, I'm going to do a Mary. I'm going to take my life, my body, and I'm going to say, okay, in this little bit of real estate, in these few cubic centimeters of flesh and blood and bone and lungs and breath and life, here, God, whatever you want to do, I'm offering myself. Let this be exhibit A of what you want to do in the world. And do you understand, brothers and sisters, every Christmas, if this happens, if we get it a little more Christmas by Christmas, the people here in Naples, Florida, the people all across this country and all across countries around the world, if every year we get more and more people to get it a little more deeply, to believe it a little more passionately, and to, in our hearts, prepare him room so that we can become pregnant with the Spirit of Jesus Christ alive in us, so that we can become members of this family and this new humanity who go into the world and see it in a very, very different way, and who live with a whole different agenda. If that can happen, then we will be transformed and we will become agents of transformation in this world. So that woman on that bridge, she was not forgotten. She was not forgotten. And all of us today, in a sense, we stand with her and we say, we believe in the God who starts with value, not with the people with the biggest net worth, and the biggest bank accounts, and the biggest houses, and the biggest yachts. We start with the people with the biggest vulnerability and the biggest need, the people who everybody else forgets. We stand with God who begins with them. Can I say it this way? It's not trickle-down grace. It's grassroots grace. It starts at the bottom and grows up. Amen. So if we don't just want to think about the Christmas story as a nice little story about what happened back then, but we want to think about it as an ongoing revolution that's still bearing fruit today, then every one of us then is invited to join Mary and say, here I am. Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. Let's bow our heads. Make that our prayer. I just wonder in silence, why don't you take one of those phrases? Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. And just sit for a moment with that phrase and let it become your prayer. A new humanity, a new regime of peace and reconciliation and love and generosity and kindness. I'm opening my heart, Lord. It's not too late. The impossible is possible. Let it be to me, with me, according to your word.